This conference will now be recorded.
Yeah. Hello, all. Good morning. Yeah. So let us start. Okay. Static dependency injection I'll show you. So if there is any static setter method, right, in your class, if there is any static, in general, right, in Java, we implement dynamic methods and static methods as well. If any class, if it have static method, okay, through that static method, if you want to pass something or if you want to get something, right, if you want to pass something into static method or if you want to get something from the static method, getting is not a big deal. In Java, using class name dot method name, we call it for calling static methods. So test dot set email, you can pass name and email. So if that is the case, in Spring, how to handle it? If any class, if it have a static method, how to do dependency injection into it? If it have a static method, if it is a programmatic approach, we really need not to worry, as everything is in Java, we can able to call easily and we can able to pass it. If it is a XML approach, you must know about it, right? So otherwise you will find difficulty when you find a static method. So there is a helper class. The class name is method invoking factory bean. So this method invoking factory bean is a helper class from Spring. Okay. So for this class, we need to inform that our static method name. Okay, for this class, we need to inform that our static method name. So here first we need to give the static method name, the fully qualified path, in which package, what is the class name, what is the method name. So just to the method name, up to method name we should pass. And there is one more setter method in this class. Okay, it's a factory bean. If you see, it's a factory bean. We'll discuss more about this factory bean later. Okay, so we call it as a method invoking factory bean. This method invoking factory bean is a bean class. Okay, itself it have a setter method, two setter methods. One is set method, set static method, set arguments. Using the set static method, you should pass the static method name into whichever class you want to, or into whatever method you have write static method. So that method name you should pass here, and your arguments you need to pass here. If it have 10 arguments, you can pass the 10 arguments into a list. So one argument can be a value type, one argument can be a reference type. What it can be, you can pass it in the same order. Okay, let me explain through paint. So in most of the scenarios, our classes would be dynamic. It will have dynamic context in most of the scenarios, correct? Controllers, services, repositories. For most of the scenarios, we will have dynamic classes only, which means simple classes without static methods. And DAO classes. Most of the scenarios, we will have all the dynamic methods here. Most of the times we will have dynamic methods here, most of the times. In case if you have any class, sometimes we implement constant classes, constants, application constants we maintain, all the strings. Generally Sonar will not allow us to use strings. If you want to use random strings, if you want to use, right, for some kind of if conditions or switch cases, if you want to use strings, instead of putting that string variables into each and every class wherever it is required, right, we compose them into constant class first. We put them into constants. From this constants class, we will get it. From the constants class, we will get it. So here I have some constant arguments. Okay, some have some username, right, password, kind of static arguments I have. Generally, we declare them as static final. We declare them like static variables, and we usually hard code it. Or else we can get these values from properties file also. We'll see that about that later. So now consider you have some static variables here: static username, static password. Okay, static string username and static string password I have. So if you want to do dependency injection of the static username and password into this constant class, you cannot able to create bean directly like this. Bean class, you can create bean class here, but you cannot able to call static methods like a dynamic method. Constants class, and for these two variables username and password, if I have setter methods, right, if I have setter methods here, set username should be a static method, set password also should be a static method. This methods also should be static to call static context. If we have static variable, method also should be static. Otherwise, you cannot able to call it. From static, if you want to call, from non-static, if you want to call static context, you need to create an object. Otherwise, you cannot able to call. So for static variables, I have static setter methods here. So these are the static variables, and for injecting that static variables, I have static set username method and password method. So directly, if you create your constant class object, and if you try to pass this property here, property name, set username, it will not allow. If you pass set username as a method name here, and if you try to pass value, it will not allow. It will say that setter method, set username method is not a non-static method. So if it is a non-static method, you cannot able to call here. So that you cannot able to pass even a value here. You cannot able to pass a username value from here. So this is not allowed. As this is static method, this is not allowed. If it is a static method, you cannot able to call it. Then how to call my two setter methods, set username, set password? This is a constant class. I have only static context. I have only static variables and static methods here. So if a class contains static data, if a class completely contains static data, here bean creation also not really required. If it contains a static data, why I should create a bean? Why I need to create an object? Object is not required. Have completely static context. For static context, object also not required. You need not to even create object. How, without creating object, how I can call this username and password? In DAO class, I want to get username password. You can directly get it. Constant class, constant dot username, or if that is a private variable through public method, if you have get password. If you have a static method, getter method, get password, get username. You can use directly class name to get your data. Get password, get username, or get username, get password. You can use these static methods to get the data. You need not use any object here. So you can directly use static constant class, and you can able to call the required username and passwords. So object also not at all required. Object is not required, fine, but how to inject these values? So when you have some static class like constants class, if you want to pass static values in it, right? There is a helper class name called method invoking factory bean. Method invoking factory bean class. Method invoking factory bean. Factory bean class. This is a bean class, a pure bean class implemented in Spring. How they implemented it? This is a helper class available from Spring. So this class, this is how they implemented. This class is having one method called public void set static method. There is a method in this class. The method name is set static method. This is dynamic method only. The method name is set static method. So this set static method is taking one argument, string argument static method. It is taking one argument static method. So they have one private string static method variable. Okay, so here this static method name will be assigned to class level reference this dot static method equal to static method. Okay, this is one method they have. This is one method, set static method, and there is one more method name called set arguments. There is one more method name called set arguments. Set arguments. There is one more method name called set arguments. So this set arguments method will take list of arguments. So it will take list of arguments. It's a list type. List of arguments will take. So that arguments also will be assigned here. Private string arguments. So it's a list type. List of arguments is a list type. So this is a built-in class. Method invoking factory bin is a built-in class. It's a built-in class. So this built-in class is having two variables, set static method, set arguments. And for these two variables, there are two setter methods, set static method and set arguments. Set static method and set arguments we have. Apart from this, there is one more method name called get object. Apart from this, there is one more method in this factory bin class, public object get object. Public object get object. Internally, this method, what it will do? Internally, this method, this public object get object method will do what? Okay, so this get object method, is this visible? Okay, so this get object method internally will do what? Whatever set static method you given, right? The static method complete path it will take here. So using this static method, dynamically it will call your method, static method. Let's say you have a DO class or constants class. You have given that argument here. So consider you given constant class set username method you given here as a static method. The input you have given here. So using this one here internally, this get object method will call your constant class set username method, and whatever arguments you have given here, right? The same arguments it will pass here. So finally, it will call your static class. This get object method will do what? It will call your static class and static class method, and it will pass arguments. So that using this method invoking factory bin, if you pass something into it, this method invoking factory bin internally it will pass values into your statics class. Okay, so internally it will pass your values into statics class, whatever statics class you have, right? Into that statics class, this method invoking factory bin class will pass all the arguments. So this method invoking factory bin is a factory bin class. So there is a get object method in it. That get object method will do this job. So for this get object method, we need to pass two arguments. One is static method and one is arguments. So this class you can configure. This class you can configure in your XML file. You can configure bean tag, bean class. You can configure this class method invoking factory bean class. Method invoking factory bean class you can configure, and you can call this bean class setter methods property This bean class is having one method, set static method, and the another method is set arguments. So you can call these two static methods here. Yeah, you can pass your static method value here. You can give whatever constants class you have and whatever method name you have. You give that method here as a value, and here you can pass all the arguments in between property and property. If you have list of arguments, you can pass them here. If you have multiple values, you know using list how to pass. In between list and list, you can pass multiple values. So if you need multiple arguments, pass multiple arguments. If it is a single argument, you can pass single argument. Okay, argument 1, argument 2, any number of arguments you can pass. Okay, so this is how this bean class will help us. This is how this bean class will help us to inject static values. Okay, to inject static values. Let us see example here. Static dependency injection. So created a project, added libraries. Yeah, go to new, create a package. I'm creating a DO package. I'll create one database class. Okay, and I'm creating one more package called constants package or util package. So in my util package, I'll have all these constants. Okay, I'll create a constants class, const const. This is my class, and I want to pass the constants here. Private, static, string, username, password, driver, URL. Okay, so I want to pass username, password, driver, and URL, or else you pass these two first and then next these two. Okay, driver name, URL, username, password. I want to pass these four properties as a static values. So I'll generate getter and setter method. Source, generate getters and setters, which are static setters and getters. So these are private static data, and I'm injecting them using static setter method, static getter method. So if you want to inject separately, you can have 4 static methods, or else I want to inject all these values through one single static method. So in that case, what you can do, you write one setter method, public void, public static void set db config, set db config. This is my static method, and this method wants to take multiple arguments. One is string driver name, driver, URL, username, and password. And I want to assign these arguments to my static variables. So you can assign directly here. Constant dot driver equal to driver. URL equal to URL, username, password. So to set all these values, I have one static method, and to get these values, I'll generate separate getter methods. Anywhere if you want to get this username, passwords, data, right? I'll create getter methods to get these values. Okay. Now I have a constant class with a static setter method to inject these values: driver name, URL, username, password. Okay. And I want to use these properties into my DAO class. I have one student to DAO. Here I want to do CRUD operation. Okay. Public void save something student data I want to save. I want to do a CRUD operation. I want to do save operation. So to save, I need a connection object. So to create connection, already we have configuration in constant class. So I want to use that constant class properties here. So generally when you have strings or when you have configurations, right, if you are not going to change them, we generally declare them into constants like a private static final, right? As a final variables, we create them and we utilize them. Consider the same case, I have a static without final, and these values I want to use. So we can use them here wherever we want. Class dot for name, constant dot driver, and to get the connection, driver manager dot get connection, constant dot get URL, get username, and constants dot get password. So this is how I can get the connection, and using this connection I can create a statement. And you can execute the required operations, execute, update. If you want to insert something into database, here we can insert. Consider there is a table insert into student DS3 something. This is my table name. I want to insert values. I want to insert ID. Name, email, and address. So I'm executing a insert query to insert the data. Whoever calls this save method, they'll pass ID, name, email, address. So that data I want to store it into this table. So if you need that table, you can create in Oracle database. Create table, student ID, number, primary key, name, varchar 2 of something, name, email, address. Okay, table created. Anyway, so the code is ready, but I can able to create this bean. I can able to configure the student DAO bean in my XML file as it is a simple bean, and using this bean I can able to call this save method. But here I have constants. Alright, I mean static variables, driver, URL, username, password. These values I cannot able to pass in XML directly. We cannot able to pass. So what I need to do here, create a XML, configure your bean class here, bean ID, student DAO, class name, DAO dot student to DAO class. This is a simple bean class. A simple bean class we have. This bean class using constants driver, URL, username, password. So the constant values I need to pass here, but I cannot able to create constant bean here. I can create, but no use of creating constant bean, because it has a static method. Using bean you cannot able to pass it. Using your constant bean here, you cannot able to inject it. So instead of using constant bean, what you need to use, method invoking factory bean class we need to use. The class name method invoking factory bean. Method invoking factory bean. So this is the class. So this is the fully qualified path of the method invoking factory bean class. So configure that class here. This class is just a helper class for injecting static data. Okay, now I configured this class. This class job is, if you have any static class, that class data you can supply here. So this class is having two setter methods. Method invoking factory bean is having one static method. One method is static method, set static method. So this set static method job is, it will take one argument which is your method path, complete path of your method. So the complete path of your method. So what is my method complete path? Set db config is my method name. It is there in constants and it is there in util package. So you need to give fully qualified path here. Util dot constant dot set db config. Okay. So internally this method invoking factory bean class get bean method will call this method. Into that method, what values you want to pass? That argument you should pass here. Arguments you should pass it in a order. You need to follow compulsory order. List the list of arguments. This setter method is having multiple arguments. One is driver, URL, username, password. In the same order you need to pass that values. The value 1, driver, oracle dot jdbc dot oracle driver. Second argument, URL, jdbc colon oracle colon thin colon at the rate local host colon 1521 colon exe. Local host or else 127.0.0.1, I believe, right? This is the local host port number, right? Default, I mean IP address. So use this or localhost. Now username and password. Value username, system, and password admin. So what we are doing, using this method invoking factory bean class, we are asking help to this method invoking factory bean. What help we are asking? We are saying there is a static method in my constant class. Into that static method, pass all these arguments. So this factory bean class will help us to pass all these arguments into this static method. So now this arguments also ready. These arguments will be passed into your constant class, and wherever you are using that constants, right? Wherever you are using that constant class to get the values, there the values will supply. Okay. So finally, what I'll do, I'll put some SOP here. Insert success. Now what I will do, I'll call this DO class object and I'll try to call save method. So create application class and call it. Now application dot get bean, get the student DO bean. Give ID here and you'll get student bean. You know, right? You can get bean in this style or else directly by giving class name also you can get. If it is a class name, you need not to do any typecasting here. Directly by giving class name also you can get it. Now you can call DAO dot save method, pass ID 1, name, email, address. Now try to run this. So the data insertion success. How it is happened? I'm calling save method. Save method internally. I mean, we are opening connection here. Save method is using constant.getDriver for driver name. For URL, username, password also we are using constant.this static methods. So as this got the values, it created a connection and a statement so that finally it could able to insert data here. But who supplied these values? These values I did not give in here anything by directly configuring constant class here. Instead of that, we taken help from method invoking factory bean class. This class is doing this job, calling your set static method and passing this arguments. Okay, so if such need required, right, this is set static method. I mean, for passing static values, we have this factory bean. In case if we have any that complex requirements, such requirements, if you want to implement your own pattern, we can implement that by using factory bean concept. There is a factory bean concept. If you understand once that, then you will realize using factory bean what all things we can achieve. So this is a factory bean that already implemented in Spring just for doing static arguments injection. Okay, so we go and check this database. Select star from student. So the data inserted here. So the data inserted. Okay, so any doubts? Simple thing, right? For statics only we use this. If you have any statics, we use this method invoking factory bean for injecting static values. Method invoking factory bean is for only static variable dependency injection. Okay, if application, if it have any such statics, right, you need to use this method invoking factory bean concept. Are we clear? Hello, am I audible?
So,
Yeah.
can you please share this program to our mail?
Sorry.
Actually, I didn't get any news of this exam.
Yes, I'm sending right daily.
No, sir, I'm not getting.
Okay, Supriya, you are not getting.
Yeah,
Uh,
sir, from since first time onwards I
just a
didn't.
minute. Do you have your mail ID here? This is yours, right?
Yeah,
Supriya, is this the correct mail ID?
yes, sir.
Okay, but I'm forwarding, right? Everyday examples. You please check your email. I'm sending it. Let me show you. This is my Gmail. Yesterday also I sent, right? See this? Yesterday I sent to everyone. Okay. You are there in that mail, Supriya. Can you please check now?
Yes, right.
Around, yeah. So basically, you will see attachment here at the bottom. I will say examples.zip. Okay.
Maybe
Yes,
do we
right.
have an annotation-based approach also for invoking those static variables?
Uh,
Only maximum only we can do this.
sorry, Ravi.
Do we have any annotation-based approach also for initializing those static variables?
Yeah. So see, it's a simple thing, right? If it is a annotation based configuration, right? If it is an annotation based configuration, we pass all these values from properties file itself. Okay. So that is the next concept I'll show you. So factory bin is not really required in that scenario. Factor bin is not required, not at all required. When we go with the programmatic approach, many things will be simplified as it is in program, right? In Java layer itself, we can able to call directly, or else using properties, right? From properties we can able to inject it. Let me show you that example now itself. Okay, properties dependency injection, how to handle. Okay, so the same data, instead of sending it from XML file, how I can pass this data from properties file. Okay, so the properties file, from properties file also we can able to read this data and we can send. Okay, let me create one properties file here. Okay, something application dot properties. Okay, application properties, keep the same data here. Driver equal to driver name, URL, username, password. Now you can read data from here and you can pass these values, right? You can read from properties file and you can pass. How to read? To read values, right? To read values, context colon property placeholder. There is a tag name called property placeholder location. We need to give our properties file location, resources slash application dot properties. So if you can pass your application properties path here, what it will do, this properties, it will load it into application context. So now here I have properties, right? Key and values. In a properties file, we can maintain key equal to value. So this is key and this is value. This is key and this is value. So all that key values, it will load it into IOC context. Now wherever you want to use them, directly you can use it. Here if you want to use it, yes, you can use dollar expression, pass that driver name here, URL here, username. Whatever key you have here in the property file, right? You can use the same key. So you need to use the simple dollar expression. So this expression will read value, password. from where this expression will read value, whatever properties already loading into your IOC context, right? So these properties will be available for you using this simple expression. You can able to read them. Okay, they will be available throughout your application. Wherever you want, use simple expression and you can read it. Now the same example, if you try to run, insertion success. So that same driver configuration now loaded from properties file. Okay, this is one way. There is an annotation way also that we will see. Okay, so now this record also got inserted. Okay, so 2 records are there in database. So if you want to load properties, this is one way. There is an annotation approach again. There is an annotation approach. Instead of using this method invoking factory bean, directly if you want to load using value annotation also, we can do that. Using @value annotation, you can do that. You can pass the values here. What it is saying, the value must be defined on the attribute value. What is it? So value, here you need to pass the same expression again. Same expression, driver URL, username, password. So in that case, even the setter method is also not required for us, right? Automatically our properties will be loaded here. Even the setter method not required. This method invoking factory bean also not at all required. Whatever properties we have, that properties directly will be loaded here. Okay, same thing we can achieve using value annotation also. If it is a pure programmatic approach, let us do this. Do that as a separate example. Okay, let me keep it here. Let me create one more example. Static dependency. Now it is static or dynamic. Nothing to worry, right? Even if it is static or dynamic, you need not to worry. It will pass all the values using @value annotation. But the problem is, you know, you need to create this object. Though it is required or not, you need to create an object to pass these values. Shall we see that tomorrow? I don't want run fast now here. Okay, we'll show you that. Okay, yeah. Yeah, this is how we can use a static variable dependency injection using method invoking factory bean. The same values, if you want to read from properties also, you can read. You can configure your properties file location here using this context colon property placeholder configurer. So this will read your properties data, and wherever you want to use it, you can use it. Okay, yeah. So this properties using annotations also we can handle, but no rush. Even in Spring Boot also we need to do everything the same way. We'll focus more on this design patterns first.
I mean, which approach is faster, annotation based or XML based?